Welcome to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and the last day of the Nobel Announcements Week. The Academy convened this morning to award the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. This prize is financed by the Central Bank of Sweden, awarded by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and included in the Nobel Prize program. It has been awarded now for more than half a century since its start in 1969. My name is Göran Hansen. I am the Secretary General of the Academy, and with me today are, on my right side, Professor Peter Fredriksson, who is the Chairman of the Prize Committee, and who will make some remarks about the prize immediately after I've read the announcement. On my left side is Professor Jakob Svensson, who is a member of the Prize Committee, and who will tell us more about the research that is being awarded today. Later on, we hope to have one of our new laureates with us on a phone line, and of course there will be opportunities for questions. This year's prize is about alleviating poverty. Årets pris handlar om att mildra fattigdomen. Kungliga Vetenskapsakademin har idag beslutat att utdela Sveriges Riksbanks pris i ekonomisk vetenskap till Alfred Nobels minne för år 2019, gemensamt till Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo och Michael Kremer för deras experimentella ansats för att mildra global fattigdom. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has today decided to award the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel for 2019 jointly to Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kremer for their experimental approach to alleviating global poverty. And here we have some brief biographic data about our new laureates. Dr. Abhijit Banerjee was born in Mumbai in India in 1961. He received his PhD from Harvard University in the United States in 1988, and he's currently the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in the United States. Dr. Esther Duflo was born in 1972 in Paris, in France. She received her PhD from MIT in 1999, and she's currently the Abdul Latif Jamil Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics at MIT. And Drs. Banerjee and Duflo are a couple, not only in research, but also privately. Dr. Michael Kremer was born in 1964. He's an American, and he got his PhD from Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States, and he remains there now as the Gates Professor of Developing Societies. And with that, I'd like to ask Peter Fredriksson to make some introductory remarks about the prize.
Thank you, Göran. So this year's prize in the economic sciences is about alleviating global poverty. Now, how to reduce global poverty is a fundamental but also a daunting question. This year's laureates have shown that it's best to break down this daunting issue into smaller, more precise questions. Questions you can credibly answer. They have examined the impact of interventions in various important areas, such as education, health, agriculture, and access to credit. Which interventions work? Why do they work? And are the benefits greater than the costs? Effective policy alleviation requires that we can answer these questions. And the most credible way of answering them is to try particular interventions in field experiments. This experimental approach has completely reshaped research in development economics. The results have had a clear impact on policy and keeps improving our ability to fight global poverty. Professor Jakob Svensson will now describe the research contributions of the laureates in greater detail.
Thank you.
So, despite the fact that there has been massive progress in the last few decades, global poverty remains a very big problem. In low and middle-income countries, more than 700 million people still live in extreme poverty. 1 in 3 children are malnourished, and most children leave school without basic skills in reading, writing, and mathematics. So how to effectively reduce global poverty remains a very important question. This year's prize in economic sciences rewards an approach that identifies effective ways of reducing global poverty. The new experimental approach has pushed the research frontier forward in crucial ways. First, it helps us identify the causes of poverty. Second, it helps us draw conclusions about causal effects of policies to fight global poverty. And finally, it facilitates the analysis of cost effectiveness across different options or policies to reduce global poverty. To illustrate the new approach, let me take an example of a very important topic or area, namely the learning crisis. That is the fact that many children learn very little in school. Why is that, and what can be done about it? Well, in essence, in the new approach, this broad question about why are school children not learning are broken down into more detailed and specific questions, such as what's the impact of providing more school inputs, for example, textbooks? How can we reduce teacher absence, and what's the impact of such a reform? And then it tries to answer these specific questions using field experiments, that is, experiments among the people most affected. And such field experiments can tell us about the causal effect of a specific intervention. It can tell us about which interventions work, and if properly designed, it can tell us why a specific intervention works or why it does not work. That is, it can tell us more about human behavior. With sufficiently many such field experiments, we can draw firm conclusions about causes and about policies. And let me stay with the learning example or learning crisis question and give you some example of what we today know. So for instance, we know that more school inputs, such as textbooks or school meals, without complementary reforms, do not lead to better school results. In fact, this result was first documented by Michael Kremer in the very first study using this new experimental approach. On the other hand, we know that reforms that better match teaching to children's learning levels are of great value. And one example of such an intervention is the Teaching at the Right Level program. That was an intervention evaluated and redesigned through a series of field experiments by Banerjee and Duflo. And today, it serves more than 60 million pupils in India and Africa. So the new experimental approach has not only transformed research in education, but research on all core areas of development economics. So health, credit, agricultural transformation, and so forth. And in all these areas, it provides evidence of what works and why. Some interventions have been scaled up. Others have influenced policy more indirectly. And some policies have been abandoned simply because they were proven to be ineffective, thereby saving resources that governments or NGOs can use on more productive or effective policies. So to sum up, Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kremer have played a key role in transforming the research on global poverty alleviation. As a result of this transformation, development economics is now largely an experimental field. The research generated by this new approach has already had a clear impact on policy, and it keeps improving our ability to alleviate global poverty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakob. Now we hope that we can get one of our new laureates with us on the phone line. I'm waiting for a signal here. Not yet.
Hello, this is Esther.
Yes, hello. Dr. Duflo?
Hi, how are you?
Hi, yeah, this is Göran Hansen, who woke you up an hour ago to give you the news about your prize. Thank you for being with us. Everything okay? You have had your cup of coffee, I hope?
Yes, I have it. I have my tea in front of me.
Very good. I'm sitting here in the session hall of the Academy of Sciences, and there's a large number of journalists here. I'm sure they would like to ask you some questions. So, are you ready for them?
Absolutely.
Who would like to start? Gentleman over there.
Jonas Solin, Swedish Television. Congratulations. What would you say is
Thank you very much.
What would you say is the essence of your research?
So the essence of our research is to try to make sure, our goal is to make sure that the fight against poverty is based on scientific evidence. It starts from the idea that often the poor are reduced to caricatures, and often even people who try to help them do not actually understand what are the deep roots of the problems that are addressing the poor. Poor people are supposed to be either completely desperate or lazy or entrepreneurial, but we don't try to understand we don't try to understand the deep root and interconnected root of poverty. So what we try to do in our approach is to say, look, let's try and unpack the problem one by one and address them as rigorously and scientifically as possible. And that's how we developed and used in the fight against poverty the experimental approach to better understand what are the reasons for particular problems. For example, the learning crisis that Professor Svensson was talking about, and what can be done about it. What works, what doesn't work, and why.
And what was the reaction when you received the news that you got the prize?
It was incredibly humbling, to tell you the truth. I didn't think it was possible to win the Nobel Prize in Economics before being significantly older than any of the three of us. And I think the reason is that there's something unique about the Nobel Prize in Economics among all the prizes, which is that it reflects, I think, a change in the world and a change in the field of economics beyond our individual work. And it takes some time, usually, for this to happen, and in a sense, we're too young for that. But I think what it reflects is the incredible collective work that this is. So I think the three of us stand for hundreds of researchers and who are part of a network that work on global poverty that we created together 15 years ago, JPAL, and thousands of staff, and of course all of the partners and NGO and government that we have worked with. So that it really reflects the fact that it has become a movement that is much larger than us, but we are delighted to have this opportunity to represent.
Thank you. More questions? Yes, gentleman there.
Hello, this is Jens Nordström from TV4 in Stockholm, Sweden. Congratulations, Dr. Duflo. I'm curious, you're the second woman who has won the economics prize ever. Is this important?
I think this comes at an extremely opportune and important time. I'm also incredibly humbled to be only the second woman, and I also hoped to represent all the women in economics. we are at a time where we are starting to realize in the profession that the way that we conduct each other privately and publicly is not conducive to all the time to a very good environment for women, and showing that it is possible for a woman to succeed and to be recognized for success. I hope is going to inspire many other women to continue working, and many other men to give them the respect that they deserve, like every single human being.
We also live in a very turbulent time in the world at the moment, where there are numerous risks to the economy. What do you think about these risks that we see, considering Brexit, trade wars, etc.?
I think we live in turbulent times, or in a sense hard times, where many people are many individuals in rich countries are deeply concerned about their position in the world, and they feel that they have lost their dignity, and that they are not, they don't have the place in the world that they deserve, and that's probably at the root of many of the turmoil that we are seeing. And I think going back and, in a sense, trying to do the same thing that we did for poverty, but for people who live in our richer countries, who might not be as poor, but in a sense also a very difficult life, and that understand what these problems are and what the sources of this problem and what can work to address them, could make a difference in the future. So in the very short run, we'll have to kind of try to weather the turmoil, and eventually crises come and go. In the longer run, in order to avoid the next crisis, we really have to do a much deeper work in understanding the life of the less fortunate in our societies, and what we can do to make them better and more meaningful in the face of all of the disruptions that they experience.
My final question is, a lot of your research is about alleviating poverty. You've just been given a sizable amount of money. How will you use it?
When I was about 8 or 9, I read a biography of Marie Curie. And when she got her first Nobel Prize, she bought a gram of radium. And I thought this was really fantastic, that this was showing so much dedication to what she was doing. I guess we'll talk between the three of us and figure out what is our gram of radium.
Thank you very much.
That's wonderfully put. Any more questions? Yes, please. Gentleman over there.
I'm Johan Schick from the TV channel EFN. Congratulations, Dr. Duflo. I would like to ask about the two major strategies from the richer world towards poverty in developing countries. And I think of, on the one hand, foreign aid, on the other hand, trade liberalization. Could you make a comparison between these two and tell us what you found the most important of them?
Neither of them is sufficient on its own. I think the importance of foreign aid for the developing countries is often overstated. So some people are disappointed that aid is not doing more, and some people think that the potential of foreign aid to transform the countries is radical. But the truth is that the amount of money that it represents for developing countries is actually small relative to their own budget, except in some very, very, very small, very, very poor countries. Most of the money that is being spent on the poor is being spent by the developing countries themselves with their own resources and their own budget. Of course, aid can play a critical role, both in fighting a global crisis that need a very quick response, like Ebola or like a catastrophe, a climatic catastrophe, for example. And by giving countries some breathing space to experiment with new approaches that they can then implement on large scale. It's much easier to do that with aid money than with your own budget, because the budgets are so tight. But the role cannot be overstated one way or the other. It cannot solve all the problem, even if we tried the best. Now, if you look at trade, an opening to trade is, of course, very important. And when richer countries like the European Union, for example, implements trade barriers, hidden or real, that hurts the developing economy. That said, it is not enough to open, even if we were to the entire world, we're going to fully open its market to the products from developing countries, it wouldn't be sufficient. Because entering international trade, breaking into, a European market for a farmer in Kenya is not going to happen without considerable help. They would have to learn what to produce. They would have to learn what to produce at the right standard of quality. They would have to find how to sell and how to market. They would have to find reliable intermediaries, etc. And so the trade is very important, but in order to be effective, it will have to be complemented with all sorts of other measures that aid can, to some extent, help financing. So you really want to think of these two, not as substitute, but as complement.
Thank you very much. One last question, lady over there.
Congratulations, Esther. I'm a reporter from Nordic Chinese Times, and as far as I know, many Nobel laureates in economics give speeches to China every year, but most of their studies are not fully recognized in academic and social practices in China. So what do you think about this problem, and do you think your study can be applied in China? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have done almost no work in China personally, but again, I think that this prize really recognized the collective effort of hundreds of researchers. Many of them have worked in China. And that research, of course, is pertinent for China because it took place in China. And even though China has undergone considerable economic growth, and as a result, many people are much richer now, and the poverty rates are fully down. There are still a lot of areas in China that are still rural and that are still quite poor. And understanding how people work there and function, and what their problems are, and how to address them is as pertinent as ever.
Thank you very much. I think that was the last question. So many thanks again for being with us at this press conference. And now we look forward very much to your and your husband's visit to Stockholm in December. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, and now there is opportunities for questions to the panel. Any questions? Don't be shy. Everything is, yes, we got the question. Wonderful. That gives you an extra bonus.
I'm wondering, there's always been a talk of the small number of females. There's only one person before, Esther Duflo, who got the prize. Has this discussion influenced the committee in any way?
I'll give the word to Peter in a second, but let me just say that I think this reflects that there are more and more women scientists going in also into the economic sciences field.
Yes, I mean, this is a question that we take extremely seriously. As Göran said, partly it reflects how the profession has evolved over time. So over time, we're seeing more women coming into academics, and over time, I'm convinced that we're going to see more female laureates as well. One may note that one of the best predictors of the Nobel Prize is the so-called Bates-Clark medal that's given to researchers under the age of 40, and the first female to receive that was in 2007. Esther Duflo received it in 2010. So that gives you some idea of that this is, the female entry into prestigious academic positions in the economics is relatively recent. But
I'd like to add one more thing. It's important to remember that Esther Duflo gets the prize not because she's a woman, but because she's made the most important contributions.
Absolutely, and that's our job, to evaluate the research contribution. That's our sole job.
Esther Duflo mentioned that she mentioned that she thought it was important that women receive this prize, as it shows that there are role models around. Do you agree that that should be something that you should take into consideration?
We are, in all the areas of the Nobel Prize, we are encouraging nominators to take a broad perspective with regard to women, ethnicity, geography, and we're following that very carefully and to see the impact on the number of nominations. Then we have educated ourselves by inviting experts on, for instance, gender issues to lecture to us and with internal discussions. In the end, we have to give the prize to the most worthy individual, whether he or she is Scandinavian or not, as Nobel wrote in his last will. So in the end, gender or ethnicity does not matter, but we have to make sure that the best scientists are nominated and evaluated irrespective of their gender or their citizenship.
You'll have to excuse me if I dwell on the question. I'm also a bit curious on the reasoning behind that poverty research gets the prize this year. Is there any external factor that, or was it just a time to give a prize for alleviating poverty?
I think I'll ask both Peter and Jakob to comment on that. Who would like to start?
Should I start? I mean, global poverty is always a major issue, and as Jakob described, the laureates have really transformed how development economics is conducted, and it's given many new important results. And this transformation started in, say, the mid-1990s, and by now we sort of have had sufficient time in order to evaluate that this is a transformation that sticks, if you want. I don't know.
No, I think you mentioned exactly why. It takes time to evaluate a particular contribution, and this particular contribution has had a huge impact in a relatively short period of time, maybe in 20-25 years, which is maybe not typically the case. And why it came up this year or not last year or 3 years from now, I actually don't know.
Time was ripe now.
Yeah. Time is right.
Any more questions? Yes, please, one more.
Yes, please. Could you tell us a little more about how these three laureates relate to each other in the research? In what way has the results come up? One of them is a bit older than the others. One of them is a bit younger. Has that an importance for who started this kind of research and who has concluded it?
Yes, a bit in a very simple way, one could say that this whole experimental approach started with Michael Kremer and a set of studies he was conducting in Kenya in the mid-1990s. And then relatively quickly after that, the contributions by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo both deepened the experimental approach and broadened the experimental approach. And thereafter, the three laureates have contributed in many ways. I've talked about some of the ways in my short presentation, but there are in other important ways, such as how do you draw more firm conclusions, how can you talk about issues of generalizability and so forth, where the three laureates have all made important individual and combined contributions.
Thank you. More questions? If not, it's time to close this press conference. And then we're going to close this hall because we're renovating it. So tomorrow the construction workers will come in here, but we hope to have it right and ready for next year's press conferences. But we'll close the press conference and there will be opportunities for individual interviews. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this year's prize in economic sciences goes to Abhijit Banerjee, Michael Kremer and Esther Duflo for their experimental approach to alleviating global poverty. Jakob Svensson, expert from the committee, please explain to our viewers, maybe not all of them have followed the press conference, explain quite generally what is this prize about?
Well, this prize is about a new approach in development economics or in economics research more generally. And it's an approach that helps us better identify ways or policies that we can use to reduce global poverty. So that's the short answer.
And would you say there is a metaphor that you could use to explain their discoveries, their findings?
Well, I think the metaphor in this case would be that you start with a broad question and then you break them down into much more detailed and more manageable questions. And then you make sure you answer those more detailed questions using the very best empirical methods you can to establish that you're saying something about the causal effects about poverty and poverty alleviation. And that's essentially what this new approach is all about.
Could you give us an example of this?
There are many examples. So one example, a favorite example I like is a very early study by Banerjee and Duflo. It was a study that was aimed at trying to change the way teachers were teaching to better match it to the students' needs. And students usually in this scenario came to school with very poor backgrounds. And there was a set of experiments, field experiments, that helped them evaluate and redesign this program into becoming a very effective program to help, in particular, kids that are falling behind. And now this program is used in many parts of the world, both in India and in Africa. And the last time I checked, I think the estimate was that it's reaching more than 60 million children.
How would you say these findings can affect our lives?
Yeah, so I think it's a scientific approach to identify the best and most cost-effective ways to reduce global poverty in all its different dimensions, so on education, on health, on various income-generating activities. And of course, these approaches is particular aimed at helping the very poorest of us here on the world. And I think it has an enormous impact if more and more governments and international organizations took this approach more to heart and used it in their normal operational activities.
And what makes you personally excited about this year's prize?
Yeah, so this is an area of research I am myself involved in. I've been using the same type of approaches also for quite some time, and I think it's, for me, it's just, it has opened up new doors to explore ways to understand underlying reasons or underlying causes of poverty and ways to combat it. So I am super happy about this year's prize.
And Esther Duflo is the second woman ever to get the to be awarded the prize in economic sciences. Yeah. How come there are so few women so far?
Yeah, so as has been said many times before, I think one of the main issues is that there's most discoveries that are rewarded the Nobel Prize are discoveries that happened way back in time, at which time there were actually very few women active in professions like economics, but also in many natural science professions. Nowadays, we see that is changing, but before that is transformed into, for instance, Nobel Prizes, it has taken a bit of time, but I think now going forward, I think that type of question will be hopefully less and less seldom asked, is my hope.
And would you please tell us a bit more about each laureate?
Yes, so Esther Duflo, now you have to correct me, she was 46 now, I think she turns 47 this year. She was born in Paris, in France, and she studied in the US, and she's a professor at MIT in the United States. She's born to one of the other laureates, she's married to one of the other laureates, namely Abhijit Banerjee. And Abhijit Banerjee studied he's from India, he studied in the US and is also a professor at MIT. And Michael Kremer is an American, also studied in the US, and now a professor at Harvard University. And all three of them have been heavily involved in this field-based experimental approach in developments over the last 20 plus years.
What did they say when they received the call?
So we called, I don't think we ever managed to reach Michael Kremer, but we woke up Esther. My sense, she was in a shock. It was, to be honest, it was very hard to hear what she was saying. And she called for Abhijit, and we could hear Abhijit slightly better, but even him, I think, were a bit in a shock. So I think, the typical thing is, of course, most laureates are significantly older, and this group of laureates this year. So my guess was that they were not expecting to get a call from them about the Nobel Prize this year.
And finally, can you explain, please, the main impact of this discovery or these findings in 30 seconds?
Yeah, the main impact is that it's already now giving a set of recommendations in different areas. So when it comes to improving education, and in particular how you get more kids to learn better in schools, or when it comes to getting families in low-income countries access to preventive methods. Already now we know of a set of interventions or policies that can make an impact. Then it's in essence up to policymakers and others to make sure we use these insights and knowledge to make a difference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.